We're going to be looking at the battle calculator for the Civil War simulation. What we got here is the list of the states that are in the Union Army up here in blue, and down here are the Confederate states. It lists the number in the Army, and of course for real numbers, to keep the numbers small enough to fit on the map, for 1,000 men equals 1 on this particular chart. The second row here we've got our other state volunteers. For Ohio, they have 320, and they also have 40 from Virginia. So 40 volunteers from the Confederate state of Virginia are on the Union side. Natural resources, most of the natural resources come from Pennsylvania. They were the most developed during the war. And so if Pennsylvania were to fall to the Confederates, we would have to turn that to 0, which would turn everybody's to 0, because that's where most of the resources came from. So we'll put that back in there. Railroad infrastructure is at a 2, and those are the same for everyone. And industries at a 2. Determination is at a 1. The reason we use a 1 is because the Union will be going into and fighting mostly on southern territory, and people always fight harder when they're defending their home territory than the invaders do. So then we get our military ratings, which are shown here, and then the power, which is there for looks mostly. The Confederate states, we have the same things. Their natural resources and their industry are mostly imported from Europe. So we have the same thing here. If they happen to lose that, then those ratings would change and go to a 1. So the yellow box ones change all the Confederate states. If you've looked at the map, you know that most of their stuff comes from overseas because they haven't developed a lot of natural resources. Down here to the Navy, we can see the Union has a very large Navy, 1,000 tonnage, compared to the Confederates 100, and a little higher rating. Of course, most of the Navy was part of the Union and not part of the Confederacy, although they did have a small, fast Navy that was able to smuggle in supplies on a limited basis. Down here in the colored box, before we go to the battle calculator itself, down here is kind of our quick key. These lists all the states and their ratings those are all derived from these numbers up here. So if we change something up here for natural resources or railroad or anything like that, it'll all change down here, so you only have to look down here to find your ratings. Now, one last thing with the Navy. If the Union Navy blockades the South, you're going to reduce the natural resources for goods coming from Europe into Alabama by 1. And the reason we only reduce it by 1 is because the South was able to smuggle some natural resources and industrial goods through the Union blockade. And so we don't take them away completely. So now to the battle calculator here. We're just going to put in an example. We'll just put in Minnesota. And we'll say that they're going to be taking in their 20 troops, rating of a 7. They are going to be attacking, and so that'll reduce their rating by 1. Disease and desertion percentage, we'll say that's about 0.10 or 10%. And we'll say that the Minnesota contingent is going to invade, we'll say, we'll just use for an example, we'll say Texas. Okay, so we'll say Texas, looking at the number of troops, Texas has, we'll start with a 70, and their rating is at 8. They're going to get +1 because they are defending. Disease and desertion, we'll say, is at 0.2 or 20%. And so we already have our outcome of the battle. Now, if we had multiple states, we'd have extra lines to fill those in. And we see that Texas is the winner. They started out with 70. They were attacked by 20. And they were now left with 44, which you see in the yellow box. Now the yellow box will show up, whoever wins, that yellow box will show up in the win column, which will automatically show you right away who has won the battle. And so this is basically how the battle calculator works. If you have different periods, there's different ones on each one of these that will show you how to use it, and for each different class period, and so you can keep all those separate. And so they all stay the same in case you have maybe 2 or 3 different class periods that run the simulation all at once. So that's an explanation of the battle calculator.